Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and it's finally time. Yeah, I can start showcasing the Chaos Dwarfs in campaign. There's a lot to talk about. This is going to be a fairly long video. As you can see here, the Chaos Dwarfs have made their rightful place on the campaign selection screen. The majority of this video is going to be focused around the Chaos Dwarfs in Immortal Empires. There's not going to be anything regarding spoilers, so don't you worry about that. I've got that all sorted for another video which will be clearly labeled. Now, as usual, keep in mind that everything that you're going to be seeing is in early access, so some stuff can change by the time that this DLC goes live on the 13th of April. It's not too long now, so I don't imagine too much is going to radically change, if anything. We've got all that out of the way, so let's just jump right into the Legendary Lords, talk about some specifics about them, and just in general, everything to do with the Dwarfs. So we're going to talk about the faction and lord effects as per usual. We'll start off with Astrogoth Iron Hand, as he's the first one that you can pick. With faction effects first, Conclave influence gained from all sources plus 10%. This is a very important type of currency for you. Research rate plus 10%. Control plus 2, all provinces. Again, very useful if you're going to have a lot of laborers. And now if we move on to the lord effects, we have the following. Passive ability, Mechanical Overdrive. Casualty replenishment rate plus 5% for Lord's Army. And finally, ward save 15% for Bull Centaur Renderer units in Lord's Army. Yep, your Bull Centaurs are going to be a lot more disgusting if you decide to use Astrogoth Iron Hand. As a quick note, I know that they're not getting as many effects as many other factions, but don't you worry, the Chaos Dwarfs do have a lot going for them within their own respective faction. Anyways, so if we go into just the campaign map very quickly, we're not going to talk about the start positions, you can already see where you are anyway, but we will talk about the starting army as it is fairly decent. You've got access to a Dwarf Warrior unit with great weapons, a unit of Orc Labourers, 2 units of Goblin Labourers, 2 units of Chaos Dwarf Blunderbusses, and finally a unit of Bull Centaurs with dual weapons. These are probably my favourite ones out of all the Bull Centaurs, and believe me, they really rack up the kills. Alright, so we know what this character can do in terms of spells and damage, but what we want to see is obviously the unique skill line, which will focus a little bit on magic, diplomatic relations with pretty much every single Chaos faction, and also the Ogre Kingdoms, which is going to be very useful, as you do need some friends. There's one skill which is going to make your Bull Centaurs a lot better, so you can get a full Bull Centaur army with Astrogoth, and yeah, it's going to be very noticeable. All in all, I'd say that the unique skill line is pretty good for this character. I think all 3 characters have some decent ones. We'll be checking out those later on in the video. What you've been able to see is there's a quality of life change there, where if you're going over a skill that directly affects units, it will show you the unit cards. It might not be the biggest thing, but it's definitely something that will be useful for people. Visually is always better. Finally, you get 2 items with Astrogoth, which are unlocked at rank 8 and rank 15, respectively. Only one of them has a quest battle. The other stuff is just pretty simple. He's got less items than the other legendary lords, but keep in mind that he's also got the baby stroller already on him, so he's already going to be fairly powerful anyway. Alright, now we're going to move on to Drazov the Ashen, a really cool character from Forge World. So for faction effects we have the following. Armaments cost minus 10% for all unit capacity upgrades in the Hellforge. It's actually quite a good one. Armaments outpost plus 10%. This means that you're going to be generating armaments a lot quicker. With the reduction too, you're going to be getting those troops out fairly quick. Next, we're going to move on to the Lord effects, which is campaign movement range plus 10%. Upkeep minus 25% for Kadai units in Lord's Army. This would be both the Fireborn and the Destroyers. And then finally, we have the passive ability Dark Renown. All in all, pretty good bonuses. I will have a video which will go over all the characters and compare their campaigns with all their bonuses. But let's start moving on as we're going to jump into the campaign itself. The starting army is pretty decent. So you've got 1 unit of Orc Labourers, 2 units of Goblin Labourers, 1 unit of Fireglaves, 1 unit of Blunderbusses, and 1 unit of Fireborn. You've also got a Castellan there, and I remember that I've just forgotten to mention that Astrogoth starts with a Bull Centaur hero. So you've already got quite a little bit here. The Castellan is actually fairly decent. I know he might not be the most exciting of heroes, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So Drazov is going to focus very heavily on magic, as you can imagine, but still be very capable in close combat. Now, what you do get here is in the unique skill line is quite a bit of administrative help. So you get extra research rates, some construction time reduction, construction cost reduction, upkeep reduction for more Infernal God stuff, because that was like the Forge World unit, so it makes sense that the Forge World Lord is going to have a reduction for it. A bit of everything. I think that you're going to focus a lot, really heavily, on building up an empire with this character. This one's going to be able to build tall and wide, and I think that's super cool, because, again, it makes sense. You know, this is a character that was banished and wants to regain his strength, in a sense. Yeah. Anyways, so this character also has access to 3 legendary items, and you can pick them up at rank 8, rank 12, and rank 15. All of them are fairly powerful. You get a lot of bonuses here. It's definitely going to make them a lot better. Extra control is obviously very useful. Ward save for the army is going to be very, very good as you start getting more and more aggressive, as, yeah, there's a lot of factions which have aversion to you, so you're going to be dealing with a lot of people attacking you very, very quickly. And if you should equip all 3 items, which I can't imagine why you wouldn't, you'll also get an item set here, which has the following bonuses. Melee attack +5 for embedded Infernal Castellan heroes for all armies faction-wide, and finally enemy leadership -5 for enemy armies in region. Now we're going to start moving on to the last legendary character. This is Saturn the Black, a character that I've really been hyped for, and his faction effects are as follows. Maximum number of active convoys +1. This means that you can have 2 caravans going out at the same time since the moment that you can start unlocking them. Recruitment cost -50% for artillery and war machine units, faction-wide, which is insane. Lord effects. Casualties captured post-battle +15% for Lord's army. Again, very good to rack up that labor. Local recruitment capacity +1 for local province. This is going to be very useful for you. And finally, ability sadistic stare. So yeah, there's quite a lot. I'm actually pretty happy about this. Let's jump into the campaign. So again, we're not going to talk about the start position, but we already know where it is. His army is actually fairly decent. So you start off with 2 units of dwarf warriors with hand weapons and shield, 1 unit of hobgoblin cutthroats, 1 unit of Chaos Dwarf blunderbusses, 1 unit of hobgoblin raiders. This is the bow version, so you can get a lot of mobility there, and a Death Shrieker rocket, which probably needs a little bit of a buff in terms of stats. You'll also start off with a Demon Smith Sorcerer, so you'll be able to get the Lore of Fire from the very start of your campaign, and we know that it's a little bit stronger now, so that's going to be quite useful. Now, we're going to start moving on to the other stuff. So if we start looking towards his unique skill line, it's going to focus very heavily on him more than anything. Making him stronger in combat, being able to get more money from post-battle loot, more casualties captured, more labor captured. It's all going to be very useful for building up a nice empire. In general, yeah, he's probably got the best, I don't know, because he also has a rather lovely upkeep reduction there for your whole army. It's another 10%, so you can get 20% reduction, not counting any tech, which is pretty tasty. And I've just realized the embargo is over, so I can actually tell you, I've been preferring Zatan out of the 3 legendary lords in all honesty. But yeah, now I can talk about it, feels good. Anyways, if we look towards any unique items, there are once again 3. You've got 1 at rank 8, rank 12, and rank 15. Again, focusing very heavily on the character. He's going to become quite the powerhouse. He can contend with a lot of different characters. I know some people were actually kind of worried about this, but no, the dude knows how to slap, and I think that's really, really important. And finally, once again, you do have a full set bonus, which is as follows. Campaign movement range +5%, character aura leadership effect +10, and leadership aura size +50%. It's actually quite large. But yeah, that's all 3 legendary lords. It's kind of awesome, isn't it? They're quite strong. But that's not all. We do have a legendary hero. And this quest can proc pretty randomly, I think is the best way to describe it, as soon as you start recruiting some hobgoblin units. So as you can see, this is turn 2. You get some exposition for it too, which I won't read out because spoilers and stuff. But all you have to do is basically just recruit 8 units of hobgoblins, pretty much anything that you actually want, into a single army. You'll get the character, and then you'll also get 500 labor, which is very, very useful. Now, the character himself is, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but yeah, fairly good. He already starts off with 2 epic items, which means that he's already got some very powerful bonuses already from the beginning, which does mean that if you do get him later on into your campaign, that's actually not too much of a problem. He's also got a bunch of skills, and I mean an actual bunch of skills, which is going to make his hobgoblins a lot stronger. berserker, so any army that you have attached to him, yeah, your hobgoblins will do pretty much as much damage as Chaos Dwarfs will, and that's actually quite impressive. They will become your absolute powerhouse, which means very early on, if you do get it early on, and I do suggest that you do, you're going to actually not have too much of an issue trying to expand fairly quickly, and expansion is, I'd say, a little important when it comes to the Chaos Dwarfs. I must admit I was disappointed when there was no quest battle, but then when I saw how the character was, I was like, yeah, okay, no, this works. This is a very good interpretation, and he's pretty damn good. It is important to note that the other Chaos Dwarf factions can actually recruit him, but you'll get him first. If anything, it's usually the case. But now let's move into the actual game. You will notice that you do have a lot of resources, and yeah, we're going to talk about them. Obviously, first you're going to have to get into some battles at the very beginning. There's always an army that you have to deal with, which is a way that you'll be picking up a mechanic known as labor, and also as you start expanding and going into other settlements to take them over, there's a way for you to get some labor too. But the most important thing that you do need to note is that yeah, when you take over a settlement, you can have the chance to turn them into a outpost, a factory. These are for minor settlements. The major settlements can also turn into outposts and factories, but believe me, it's not worth it. Your main settlements are known as towers, and that's something that you can just pick up on rank 1, or if you want to use influence, you can then make them go higher, very similar to how Skaven use food, or then just go on sacking or raising. At the end of the day, you do have a lot of options when taking over settlements, and depending on how you play, because this is something that I can speak out as much as I want to, but we're all going to have very different playstyles, so this will affect you differently. Alright, we're going to start talking about all the different types of settlements, and the first ones themselves are the towers. These are your provincial capitals, and they are your biggest ones. They're the ones that you're going to be able to recruit all your units. Yep, you got all your troops here. And not only that, but you're going to need these. Believe me, if you want some support, if you want some protection, you're going to want as many towers as you can possibly get up. Now keep in mind that when it comes to construction, not just for this building specifically, not just for the towers, but also outposts and the factories, it's not just treasury which you'll be spending. Some buildings will cost treasury, some buildings will cost materials, and some buildings will cost armaments. So yeah, this means that this DLC is going to have you thinking about multiple different types of currency, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But as you can see, it's a pretty well-rounded style building, which is going to be pretty rare, I must say. The fact is that there's so many different types of construction that you're going to have to think about it. You'll also want to keep an eye on the fact that you can build a tower ballistics, and this is actually going to get you some Dreadquake mortar abilities. You saw them in the Let's Play. This is how it works. So defensively, and even some areas near, so adjacent provinces, you'll be able to have some extra firepower. Haven't really used those buildings too much, if I can be perfectly honest, but it does really depend on the player. Again, if you're getting attacked from all sides, it might be useful. Your second type of building is the outpost, and this one's quite interesting because you can get some hobgoblin units there, which, to be honest, if you're going to recruit hobgoblins, you'll want to get them in the outpost buildings instead, so you can make some space. Then everything else is going to work on getting you some bonuses for, you know, getting some income sorted, getting some raw materials up and running, because raw materials are very, very important. You'll also need labor for that. You'll be able to get some control in these buildings. There's also some defensive stuff. No walls though, so these minor settlements are pretty basic style minor settlements. And the garrisons themselves, at least for the outposts, aren't really great, so keep in mind you're going to want to keep those in an area which are a little bit more defended, or else you're going to start losing a lot of your productions. But speaking about production, we have the factory, and the factories themselves are pretty cool. You can actually get a few different Chaos Dwarf units here. You can even get Hell Cannons at tier 3, which is wonderful. So you can get pretty good units. Other than that, this is where you're going to be building up your armaments. These buildings can also be used to boost up the production value of your actual other things, like, you know, raw materials and so on. And the garrison is fairly decent. I mean, it's not great, but at the end of the day, you know, it's still better than just normal hobgoblins. Don't get me wrong, hobgoblins are cool, but Chaos Dwarfs are obviously going to be better at defending from, well, pretty much anything that's going to attack you, and a lot of stuff is going to attack you. I need to stress this out again, you will need to use all three: outposts, factories, and towers. How you build them up is completely up to you, but you're going to need at least one of each. especially if you want like all the goodies. A little bit of a mix does help, but that again depends on the player more than anyone else. And just for those who are curious, because I know there are people who are curious, when you take over a full area, so you know all the settlements between one province, you do get your edicts, and yeah, they're not too bad. The construction cost one is very, very useful, I will be very honest there. Especially as it reduces labor costs too for any buildings that might require that, and obviously, well, just anything that requires labor in general. Believe me, it's going to be a godsend, especially as you start getting to late game. Alright, labor. Now, labor is something very, very important as much as your treasury. It's a resource that you get from pretty much going into battles, but this will be your workload. You turn labor into raw materials, which then the raw materials get turned into armaments. There's a lot of other things that you can use it for too. But the main thing is you need to pick up labor by getting into combat, and it's very important that when you start taking over settlements, because this is an automatic by the way, you'll need to turn on labor, or else it will just make all the labor go to your main settlement and not to the other areas that you might need it. Now, labor can also be used for a pretty wonderful thing. You see, you can use labor as a very similar thing to the Slaanesh Pleasurable Axe, or even just the standard slave mechanic for the Dark Elves. You can use labor to get some conclave of influence, which is obviously very useful, get some extra cash flow coming in, or even getting a little bit of extra control. The first two can be done every single turn. The last one is every 5 turns, and believe me, you're going to find yourself using this. Extra conclave influence is very, very useful, especially when we get to the tower mechanic in a little bit, but in general, if you have an excess amount of labor, you might as well start actually using it, as you will start to get issues with, say, control. Too much labor and you'll already have issues there. The main forms of getting labor is pretty much just getting into combat, taking over settlements, sacking the settlements. There's also some events that might pop up which will give you extra chances of getting some labor. Raiding is also a good way to do that, and also some general quests. So you do have a way to get yourself some labor. I wouldn't say that raiding is the best way to do it, but raiding can definitely be one of the more consistent ways if you're starting to run low. And yes, I've tried. You can't get labor from raiding yourself. There is no cheese there. Maybe that changes in the future, but yeah, it's expected, right? Mind you, you can get labor from actually dealing with rebellion armies, so that could be a way to make sure it's consistent. There's still a little bit more in terms of labor. I know there's a lot to talk about, but yeah, here is the efficiency section, which you can check out your labor economy. There you can do all the labor actions if you wish to, so you don't have to go from settlement to settlement. You can also actually have the intake on or off if you so wish. You can also send around your labor to other locations in case you need it, because if your efficiency goes down, you will notice it. Your 100% will start going red and, you know, it'll show a lower number. You need to keep your efficiency high. This is instant. It'll just cost you some treasury, which is perfectly good. Keep in mind that you'll have to plan ahead with these types of things, and you might go into the green in one section but go into the red in the other section because you're just lacking labor. Aggression is needed to make sure that this resource stays high. And now I see why they called it labor. It's probably thinking ahead, because if saying slave too much, it might trigger YouTube's algorithm. Alright, we're moving on to raw materials now. Now, raw materials, you'll need labor, but you can also get it through a variety of different ways. You can get it from battles, buildings, you can get it from convoys. There's so much that actually works here, and you will mainly use it for building construction, to also start making armaments, and finally for some technology. It's very easy to tell that every single resource is very much linked, and I kind of like that. It's obviously something very different to what we've normally seen, and it's definitely something that's going to take a while to get used to. At least I've had to take a while to get used to, especially when we start moving on to armaments. Armaments can be used on a lot of things too, but you need raw materials, which is gained from labor. So it's the whole, like, you know, the whole there was an old lady that swallowed a fly thing. It just carries on from that. You need the labor to make the materials then become the armaments then become the units. As you can tell, I've pretty much lost my freaking mind at this point. There is a lot going on with this faction, and it's taken a while to actually get this video sorted. And finally, for unique resources, unless I'm forgetting something, I'll slap myself if I do, we have conclave influence. So, This is something that you gain through a variety of different ways. You get labor actions from it. Settlement buildings can do that, Temple of Ashut. The settlement buildings, your towers, those are the best ones to actually get you more steady conclave influence. And you can use this for events. You can use this for seats in the Tower of Tsar that we'll talk about, but also some building construction and technology. Again, everything is totally linked. It might sound overwhelming, but believe me, once you actually get about an hour in, 2 hours in, you're perfectly golden. Believe me, if I can understand this on pretty much no sleep for the past 2 days, so can you with normal rest time. But before we jump into any mechanics, we're going to jump into the technology tab. I know this might not sound the most impressive thing, but it is actually extremely unique because we have 3 separate areas. We've got military, sorcery, and industry, which means that you can kind of play around. It's by far the best looking tech tree I've seen in Total War, Warhammer, or just in general Total War, because this is great. So, when you go into military, the military section is going to focus, of course, on, military. It's going to be able to increase the stats of your units. It's going to be able to, just in general, make you a lot more powerful. You're going to need armaments here, because if you haven't noticed, at the top, you will need in certain areas raw materials, conclave influence, or armaments. Yes, again, all linked once again. But yeah, this is honestly quite good because to the left mostly focuses around stuff like, your hobgoblins and so on. There's a few administration things thrown into the side, and then to the right focuses heavily on the Chaos Dwarfs. It's all about just going for the ones that you want to find, and it gives you a lot of freedom, which I think is extremely important. When we start moving towards, say, for example, the sorcery tab, sorcery is going to have magic stuff, as you can imagine, but also quite heavy administration stuff, like for example extra control around your areas. Now this one is not so much like the other one. This one is one that splits into 2, whereas the other ones were just 2 by themselves. Well, technically 3, but as you can see, it is actually quite interesting. You can see everything is kind of like shaped like a ball in a sense, which obviously, this is a short. If you want diplomatic bonuses and so on, you can find them in this area, which will help you just become friendly with other Chaos Dwarfs, which is important because there's very little of you, and remember, anti-player bias is a thing. In fact, it still feels as bad as it's always felt, so at certain points, the other Chaos Dwarf factions will turn on you. Then, lastly, we've got the industry one. Industry is quite good because it will help you boost up your labor production, your labor quota, just in general what you're going to be able to get from, getting buildings to be reduced in terms of cost. Everything is going to be very helpful there, but it's also going to be a way for you to improve your convoys, as convoys are very, very important, and you're going to want to have as many active as you possibly can. The great thing about having 3 separate branches is you can mix and match whenever you want. So say at the beginning you can go through military, and then you might want to focus on a little bit of industry. I'll be very honest with you, I've been playing around with it a lot, and it really depends on which lord that you play, what your playstyle is. Again, this is something that is going to be you making the big decisions, but it doesn't feel punishing. It just allows for replayability, to be honest. I think this is a very well thought out type of technology tab, which I really do hope we see in the future for other races and factions. The dwarfs, for example, would very much use this. Alright, let's go back to conclave influence because we have a totally unique mechanic here known as the Tower of Tsar, and this one is actually really, really impressive. So as you can see, there are a number of tiers, numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each of those tiers, except for number 4, has a number of districts. So sorcery district, military district, industry district, very similar to that of your tech tree. Your conclave influence is used as a resource here to claim seats, and you need to fill out 2 districts before moving on to the next tier. So for example, you'll need to fill out all of sorcery and military districts to be able to move on to tier 2. And each of these have bonuses. You can see here that you'll have bonuses that are directly to your faction, whichever seat you can control, because the other factions can also control it. They'll be able to spend the resource and pick up a seat, and even take a seat away from you. You'll also be able to take a seat away from them for special bonuses. If the district is full, the faction, the whole race, gets access to the bonuses under the title there. So for example, all sorcery district, then all the factions will get access to plus 10% research rate. That would be on tier 1, but as you will note, you have to kind of think ahead. Do you want to just blast your way through all the way to the end, or do you just want to get the bonuses which are better for you? If the AI decides to take a seat away from you, then they've got that seat for 5 turns, which then you can take back. It will cost a little bit more conclave influence. Keep in mind, diplomatic issues will happen here. So yes, you might actually see the AI fighting against each other because they've screwed each other over here. But if you do it to them, they might be incentivized to attack you. So it's very, very, very important to think ahead and go, oh, maybe it's not worth getting into a fight with them just yet. You'll want to keep in their good graces because once you get to the last tier, so tier 4, if you use a lot of conclave influence, by that point you'll have a decent amount in the bank. You'll also be able to confederate. So you've got the 2 other legendary lords, the ones that you're not playing, and also a minor faction run by Gorf the Cruel, which is a shame that isn't a unique model, but hey, yeah, it's really, really cool. I really like this. It's very political style, right? You get to play politics with your race, deciding who gets the seat, who doesn't. If you do this playing with friends, you could actively play that type of game, the whole little politics game, as, well, you won't be able to confederate your friends, but this really is super stylized and very, very different. Alright, now we're moving on to the convoys, which is, yeah, a reskinned caravan mechanic from Cafe, and I will admit, at the very beginning I didn't like the idea of this, and I've warmed up to it now. Believe me, it is so very useful to be able to get a lot of labor through this mechanic, because you can actually send in, say for example, treasury to get some labor, or even some materials, but you can then send armaments for treasury. It's a bit of a cool mechanic. It's not like the Caffeine one where you can actually ignore it, and the great thing is there's a few different boosts here. So for example, you now have access to seeing the full army. You can see all the effects, which I think is absolutely wonderful. You do get some varied armies, which I think is quite helpful, and you want to push this as much as possible to make sure that they're always active. You need to make sure that they're always active and getting stuff for you, because you're going to be able to fill up your coffers quite well. Do keep in mind that this will also mean that you will discover factions early into your campaign if you go to the furthest ones. Now, yeah, you can ignore this, but if you want to be as efficient as possible, this definitely does help. So checking every few turns or so is going to be quite useful, especially if you have multiple active convoys, as Saturn can get 2 from the very beginning. There's also other ways to be able to get more active convoys. But yeah, very, very beneficial. It's a bit of a shame that we don't see trains and stuff on the map, but I guess that was probably just too hard to sort out, or it just might be too distracting. Plus, there's certain areas where trains won't actually go. So yeah, I guess it works. Now, there is one thing that you'll want to note. There is one specific type of caravan known as the Ogre Controller. That's the trait that you get there. It's very, very good, because you'll get in a lot of diplomatic relations with the ogres, which means that if you have no interest in going into the Mountains of Morn, this is a great way to be able to get your trade agreements with them, make sure that they just leave you the hell alone. There is an issue there, though. Obviously, the ogres don't last too long, so you might have to help them out, but it helps, believe me, I've seen it and it's quite useful. Lastly, there's not too much to talk about in terms of skills for the Convoy Overseer. It is your own lord. You can get a Great Taurus or a Lamassu. It's just the usual ones. If you're used to using Caffeine Caravans, yeah, you can boost up your army capabilities, and you can also increase the amount of goods that you have or what they sell for. But it's pretty basic, so we're not going to stay here too long. We're going to move on because there's still a lot more to discuss. Going back to construction a little bit, if you have enough materials, so materials are going to be quite important for this too, you can actually build up certain buildings and instantly build them up. You can go through various different tiers very, very quickly, and that's going to be quite noticeable when you're in later campaign. Not so much in the early stuff, unless you desperately need something sorted. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about that very quickly. We're going to move on once again. Here is the building exactly from the tower that you'll be able to get. I'm just making sure that I mention this twice, as it might be useful to you once you start expanding, and yeah, you're going to get attacked a lot. I can't stress that enough. You're going to get attacked a lot. Also, for those wanting to know about Grand Cathay or Zatan, if you're deciding to play him first, you can take over the Great Bastion buildings. They will cost materials, so it's not really too worth it. I would say you would want to get this if you're just wanting to hold them back, as it's a pretty decent area. And if you use the edict, you'll be able to make it cheaper. Just don't bother sending any labor here, because it's like a proper waste. I wouldn't say even bother upgrading post maybe tier 2. There's not really a lot that you can get here. It's just a single building. And just in case you want to know about this, you are more than able to convert your outposts to factories and vice versa. this is a quality of life thing which I imagine will be used a lot more often in the future, or at least I hope so, because it's a very good mechanic. It's something that could benefit a lot of factions if we start getting some mixes here and there in terms of new buildings, but restricted ones. But anyways, now we're going to move into the last unique mechanic. This is the Hellforge. So the Hellforge is really, really interesting, as you can use this to unlock unit capacity, as you might not be aware, but most likely you will be. Anything that's considered a Chaos Dwarf unit, so this would be Chaos Dwarfs all the way up to the big monsters, this is all unit locked. So you're going to have to use armaments, again, showing the importance on how much these resources are in your campaign, but yeah, you can use this, get more. There's also some seats which will allow you to get more stuff for free, don't you worry about that, and then you can just like focus on the other matters. But as you unlock unit capacity, you'll also be able to get bonuses. This can be found in the actual manufactory of the Hellforge, because there's two different sections. And again, it shows how much attention to detail has gone here, because we know obviously the armory section is pretty much taken from, like, well, the Beastmen, but the Hellforge is going to use your armaments once again. This is how you can boost up your warriors. Say, for example, if you have 2 Chaos Dwarf warriors, you'll have to pay a certain amount of upkeep, as this is for all your active units, by the way. I would suggest probably not jumping into these buffs unless you have a pretty decent amount of armaments being made up per turn, because it does become noticeable, especially as you start getting to the late game and you start having loads and loads of armies. And yeah, you can multi-stack some of your bonuses, which means that your forces can become absolutely disgusting. Again, going back to bull centaurs, you want to make them scary? You can. Well, scarier, but you get what I mean. I'll tell you what, it's kind of difficult when the summer heat is already starting to hit Gibraltar and record some videos, but we're here with the Lord options. The first being the Sorcerer Prophet, which you've got access to 4 different types. Yes, you're getting all your laws of magic at the very beginning, which is the Law of Death, the Law of Fire, the Law of Hashut, we've already covered that in another video, and the Law of Metal. All pretty devastating stuff, and yeah, it's whichever one that you prefer the most, which is obviously quite useful considering that some people do prefer different forms of laws of magic. All of them are pretty powerful in their own right, so it's just a case of finding which one is your favorite. But I would suggest using the Law of Hashut at least once or twice, because you might end up liking it very, very much. Now, when we start going on to the skill line, there's a few things to talk about. Obviously, you've got some skills which are unique. Now, not a lot, because at the end of the day, it's already a multi-purpose character. You can see here that you can get some range bonuses up and running too. The fact is that the Sorcerer Prophet doubles also as a sort of engineer lord. Also, the Sorcerer's Curse, something that a lot of people have been asking for, is also represented in game, where you'll have more chances to miscast, but you will get very high physical resistance, all the way up to 20%, not including any other items and traits and stuff that you might pick up. Which means that your Sorcerer Prophets can also be very, very useful in melee, and you can tell by their stats, they've got no problem being upfront and personal, which is really nice. Yeah, it represents it really well. I get the same vibe I get when I'm using my actual Forge World tabletop army. I know that doesn't mean a lot to a lot of people, but seeing the tabletop stuff represented so well in this army, it does make me quite happy. Your second and final Lord option, at least for now, you never know about the future, is the Overseer. And this one is quite interesting. Don't sell it off. I know a lot of people aren't interested in melee-only characters, but you do get some unique skills which will allow you to play around with these guys quite well, and their stats are generally quite good. I would say that if you build these up correctly, you can have them taking out characters with no problem. They're also fairly good to have in the front line and do a lot more damage. I really do like them, especially for armies which have got protecting my borders, for example. I use these guys as a protection type of character. They're very, very good at dealing, say, for example, if I'm going down into Cafe with Saturn, I've actually had Overseer waiting near where I start, just in case Kolek gets any ideas or Grimgor decides, you know, something is going to go down. And I will say, very, very good. Moving on to the heroes, we've actually got a few hero options, which is great. The first one being the Bull Centaur Torok. So this guy knows how to do a lot of damage, and if you can get a really good trait on him, known as Bully, even more so. But yeah, so these are melee-based characters, and they do it very, very well. Great weapon involved. You can get them to buff up and basically be like, say, for example, a Minotaur, but a lot scarier and a lot faster too. 70 speed is nothing to sniff at. Absolutely adore them. I can't say anything bad about them. They can't climb walls and stuff, so I guess that's something. But if you need something to chase down a character, if you need something to just throw itself into a line, yeah, these guys do it very, very well. I'm super happy that we're getting all the possible options here. Sure, no goblin heroes and stuff, but hobgoblins weren't really needed when compared to getting the bull centaur Torok, for example, as it's going to add in for a lot of flavor. We're going to start moving on to your other hero options now. So the next one is the Infernal Castellan. Another interesting character, because very different to, say, for example, the Overseer. You see, the Castellan is a administrative attacker lord. Again, very similar to that of, say, for example, an engineer, dwarf engineer. It's also got range attacks because it's using a fire glaive. It's got a lot of damage there. It can also do a decent amount of anti-large because it's got a fire glaive, fire attacks alongside it. I like it. I really, really, really do like it. I feel like if you can use this guy in your army, like complementing, for example, all your range units whilst a spellcaster goes off and does his thing, yeah, there is so much that you can do here. And it's great. Again, a lot of options, and I'm really happy that we're getting a lot of options. And lastly, in terms of heroes, you have the Demon Smith in case you want another spellcaster, and I mean, who doesn't? Again, with the Law of Death, Metal, Fire, or Hashut, you can get them pretty early on. There's not too much to talk about because at the end of the day, you know, these are other sorcerers. You can get them with all the mount options. They're also able to do a little bit of range damage and stuff because, you know, these guys also work kind of like engineers. Yeah, not a great attack in terms of range. If you can, just keep them in melee because, yeah, they're not great shooters. I will be very honest about that. But then again, at the end of the day, you've got the options. You've got all three of them. You've got pretty much all the bases covered, and I think that's a really, really good thing. Even the Tomb Kings aren't really complete when compared. So, yeah. So we're going to talk about the Realm of Chaos campaign now without any spoilers, so don't you worry, and this will be fairly brief. But, yeah, it's basically everything that you've already seen, plus the Great Drill of Hashut, which you can totally ignore. If you just want to go paint the map, it's perfectly fine as far as I've seen. I don't think there's any timers regarding that, but yeah, you just have to build something. That's actually your main building, and that will give you a little bit of a bonus for the very beginning. I think it's not too pushy, really, compared to, say, for example, the standard Realm of Chaos campaign, right? Afterwards, you kind of need to do another battle, and this is something just very, very basic. It'll get you some labor too. You will get a lot of labor through the campaign, and I'm trying to keep this as vague as possible because I don't obviously want to, you know, ruin anything for you guys. But again, simple enough. Over here, then all you'll need to do is just basically pick up the specific types of artifacts that will be listed in the campaign. You get the options, by the way. You can either keep them for yourself or actually use them for the drill. You need 4 for each, and they will affect the final battle and so on. Don't worry, nothing will be spoiled until the 12th, which is the day before, and that will have a clear spoiler tag in case you don't want to see it. But yeah, it's simple enough. Honestly, it's not a bad thing. I will highly suggest at least doing the campaign once. That is, if you want the story, because the story is only available here. Everything in the Mortal Empires is literally just sandbox, which I honestly think is a damn shame. They should introduce some story elements, at least, you know, not making it so forced. I think DLCs like Champions of Chaos did it really, really well, and it's a shame that even that's not there, you know? But there's definitely a lot of stuff that you can play around with here, especially if you just want like a thematic campaign and you want to see some cool items, which I'm not too sure if they show up in Immortal Empires or not. At least they haven't through my own campaign, which is a shame because some of them are actually pretty damn good. But hey, these things do happen. At the end of the day, you can say that you have access to 2 completely different campaigns for the Chaos Dwarfs, and I think that works out quite well, to be honest. Some general thoughts regarding this campaign is that it's very, very unique. There's a little bit of everything. Yes, there's a lot of reused mechanics, but definitely from what I've been able to play, the Chaos Dwarfs feel very, very unique. Now, this is by no means a review of the product. We will talk about that on the 12th, I believe I can drop my review, and that's going to be quite large in its own right. I'm just finishing writing that. But yeah, let me know what you guys think regarding the Chaos Dwarfs in the comments below. There's going to be a lot of videos today, and if you're also interested, I'll be live on twitch.tv/thegreatbookofgrudges playing through a campaign which my Discord community has voted for. So yeah, that should be kind of fun. Until then, guys, have a nice day. The next video will drop in about 20 minutes, considering that this is a 40-minute long video. See you guys.